No? What? Oh, hi! Doggy and I we found this giant pencil. It has a giant eraser for giant mistakes. That's funny. All right. Welcome! I'm so happy you're here. We've got a great episode. Today, we're talking about the queen of the Harlem Renaissance, Zora Neale Hurston. Remember the Harlem Renaissance? Whoa! Well, that was fun. Put this pencil, it's just so giant, I just don't, all right. So, Zora Neale Hurston, queen of the Harlem Renaissance, was an anthropologist. What is an anthropologist? Interesting question, doggy. We are gonna find out. Anthropology. Anthropology is the study of cultures and people and how societies evolve. Zora Neale Hurston was not just a writer. She was an anthropologist. And what she loved to study was the history of Black folks in the South. So she goes to Harlem, New York, after graduating from Barnard College as the first African-American woman. And she's writing, and she's hanging out with all the poets and the writers and the performers, like she's hanging out with Langston Hughes, and she's having a great time. So she decides to then go down back to Florida, where she grew up, and starts recording folk tales. So today, I'm going to read you one of the folk tales that Zora Neale Hurston collected. Today's story is called The Six Fools. Now you'll notice that it says collected by Zora Neale Hurston, because that's what she did. She collected the stories of others. And below, this story has been adapted by Joyce Carol Thomas. So Joyce Carol Thomas did this really cool thing. She took a bunch of the stories that Zora collected and she turned them into picture books. And our illustrator today is Anne Tanksley. All right, let's get started. The Six Fools. A dashing young man courted a pretty young woman. After they had dated a long, long time, he asked her to marry him. Yes, she answered sweetly. So as was the custom, the young man sat down with her mother and father and discussed his intentions. Her parents were very glad, for he was strong and worked hard. He saved his money and therefore could provide well for their daughter and the children they would have. The father said, "Yes, young man, my wife will plan a nice wedding." The mother said, "Daughter, go to the cellar and draw a cold pitcher of the sparkling cider. Let's celebrate and make merry." The happy daughter took the pitcher and went down to the cellar. She turned the spigot and the refreshing golden cider gushed into the jug. While the sparkling cider was running, she started daydreaming, thinking that after she and the young man got married and had a child, what would she name it? She sat and thought, and the bubbling cider ran and ran. The thirsty young man waited patiently for his cool drink. After a long time, the mother said to the father, "What can be keeping our daughter?" So she went down to the cellar to see what was the matter. "What's taking you so long to come back with the apple cider, daughter?" The daughter said, "Mama, I just got to thinking, when we get married and have a baby, what will we call it?" The mother knitted her brow. "Daughter, that is something to think about." So the mother sat down beside her daughter and began to think too. The bubbling cider was still running. They thought, and after a long time, the father excused himself from the patient young man and went down to see what was the matter. waste. The father worked hard, saved, and didn't waste his money. Why, I'll be ruined. Remember, our daughter hasn't even married the young man yet. Well, said the mother, we've just been wondering what to name the baby after she and the young man marry and have a child. The father said, now, that is something to study about. Why, I never gave it a thought. So the father sat down and began to daydream too. Way after a while, the young man got more thirsty and went to see what was holding up his drink. What are all of you doing sitting down here in a flood of apple cider? The father said, we're just studying what to name your firstborn after you and our daughter get married and have a baby. Well, said the young man, you are the three biggest fools that I have ever laid eyes on. I'm going traveling for a year, and if I find 3 fools as big as you, I'll come back and we'll get married. He traveled and traveled, and way after a while, he saw a man leaping up in the air by a bush with some clothes on it. The man just kept jumping up in the air and falling back. What are you doing? The young man asked. The jumping man said, those are my trousers on that bush, and I'm trying to get into them. The young man said, well, why don't you take them in your hands and pull them on? I never thought of that, said the jumping man. Then he took them in his hands and pulled them on. That's one fool, said the young man, and traveled on. He saw a farmer trying to raise a cow up on the roof of a barn by a rope around his neck. He pulled and pulled, but he could not lift the cow up on the barn. Just what are you trying to do? Asked the young man. The farmer pointed up to the roof of the barn. See all that grass growing on top of the barn? I'm trying to pull the cow up there so she can eat. Why don't you toss it down to her? Asked the young man. Oh, I never thought of that, said the farmer. Now that makes 2 fools, the young man said, and traveled on. One day, the young man saw a woman rushing in and out of her house, pushing a wheelbarrow. She had placed a wide board at the door, like a gangplank, and kept dashing in and out with the wheelbarrow. The young man said, what are you moving in that wheelbarrow? I can't see anything in it. Oh, she said, I have scoured my kitchen and I'm trying to haul in some sunshine to dry it. He said, why don't you open the doors and windows and let the air dry it for you? Oh, I never thought of that. Well, said the young man, I have found 3 folks as foolish as the 3 fools I left. So I might as well go back and get married. And they did. Oh, that is a pretty silly story. But that's kind of what makes a folk tale, is that it's a story based in some truths, but something fantastical or foolish or funny happens, something unexpected that wouldn't happen in real life. Folktales were made to teach lessons or to tell stories or represent what life was like for people in different eras of time. So, we just read a pretty silly story, The 6 Fools, which is a story that's told from person to person. Zora our anthropologist hero, collected that story. And the way she collected it was by hearing it from other people. But what's cool about folk tales is that there's always different versions of them. So, you are going to be an anthropologist today. You are going to investigate a story. So, for you, how are you going to start your folktale? Or start being an anthropologist and investigating? Well, if you want, find a magnifying glass, but it's not necessary. Interview. A family member. So I like to interview older family members, so like mom and dad, or aunts or uncles, or even better, grandmas and grandpas, you know, the older ones. And you're gonna ask them, what's a family story? Story. And if you're asking your grandma or grandpa, you can just ask them, do you have any stories from when you were a kid? You were my age, even better. Okay? So then you're going to take that story and you're going to retell it out loud. You're not going to write it down yet. You're going to try to tell it out loud. Now, if no one will listen to you, you can always find your own doggy or stuffed friend to listen, okay? So you're going to retell the story. Retell out loud. It's very important because folktales are passed from person to person or from person to stuffed animal. Either way. 3. Now, you're going to take that same story and you're going to add magic or something fantastical or something really silly. Like in the Six Fools, we just have people who are doing ridiculous things. Somebody is trying to dry something inside of their house by collecting sunshine in a wheelbarrow. That does not work. It doesn't. It's foolish. It's just foolish, right? Or trying to jump into your pants off of a bush. I can't even imagine how that would work. You gotta just pull your pants up. That's how you do it. So you're gonna add magic or silly. We'll say something silly / funny. Oh look, there's another one. Lies and Other Tales. So that's what's great about them too. About folktales is that there are these elements that are exaggerating the truth, which is like lying, but it's like a white lie. It's exaggerating. It's like when you come home from school some days, or you're done with a computer and you're like, I can never use a computer again. Now, is that true? No, it's not true, but that's how you feel, and it's an exaggeration of the truth. You probably don't want to use a computer for the rest of the day, at least. But to say you'll never use it again, well, that's probably not possible. Whew. So that would be an exaggeration. So add magic or something silly / funny, or we'll just say a lie. Okay? And then, that's the point where you have collected and created your story, so write it down. And that's how you can make a folktale from your own family's folklore. Pretty fun, huh? What story should we use? Oh yeah, good choice. So, here is the very real thing that happened to me and Doggy. One day, we came to our special place, and we found a pencil, a very normal sized pencil lying on the floor. And we thought, who left that pencil there? So I picked it up. And then Doggy said, hey, look, there's also a pad of paper. Why, yes, there is, Doggy. And so I picked up the paper and I began to write with the pencil because That's what me and Dougie do when we find paper and pencil. So we started writing, and then as we were writing, the most magical thing happened. What happened, Dougie? Oh, yeah. The pencil began to grow and grow and grow, and it got bigger and bigger until it was a giant pencil. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, Dougie, this pencil might be too big to write with. Pretty cool, huh? Maybe a giant pencil will grow in your story too. What do you think, Dougie? I think Dougie likes that. So, there is a page in The Six Fools that, when I was reading it to you, I left out. I showed you the picture of them being married and happily ever after. But what it says on this page, it reads, "By that time, I left." And the reason it's like that is because it's a folktale. This story was told to Zora Neale Hurston while she was collecting the story. So the person at the end of telling that story to Zora said, "By that time I left. All I know is that the young man and the young woman, they got married." That's all that person knew. So I thought that was pretty important to share with you, that is how the story ends. By that time I left. When I was reading it, I was like, what is that? Oh, it's a folk tale. And why are folk tales so important? Well, Zora Neale Hurston knew as an anthropologist that folk tales represent people. They represent where people came from and where people are going. They're passed down from generation to generation. So it's so important to learn about different cultures and different people and where they're coming from. And to hear the stories that maybe sometimes get lost or forgotten. Like our own families, we have to keep those stories alive. We have to tell the stories of our great-great-grandparents or of our grandparents or of our aunts and uncles. Because it's important to keep those stories going and to just tell them. So, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about folk tales and Zora Neale Hurston. It was great having you. I know Doggy had a great time. Right, Doggy? Also, I want to give a big thanks to Kara Hansen, who let me borrow all of her awesome Zora Neale Hurston folktale picture books. These are hard books to come by. So thank you so much, Kara, for sharing with us today. As always, you can learn more about folktales and different writing programs at Lake Erie Ink. Check us out at lakeerieink.org. Thanks so much for joining us. This was great. Bye.